Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it's great to be in this place and address Parliament for the first time in many weeks. Of course, the Prime Minister prorogued Parliament, taking away this opportunity to do so. So it's great to be back here. It's great to see you and my colleagues on all sides of the aisle once again. And I don't think it's any secret that the Prime Minister, we all know, decided to prorogue Parliament because of his involvement in the WE charity scandal. So, Speaker, following the words from the Governor-General, there was absolutely nothing in the Prime Minister's address last night on prime time that couldn't have been announced in any normal press briefing or even here on the floor of the House of Commons. The Prime Minister, of course, as many are saying, pulled the wool over the eyes of our network executives, claiming that it wasn't partisan politics, but an address to the nation on COVID-19. Now we all know after the fact the address was entirely political, providing further evidence that prorogation was all about distraction. Now the nation was treated to the Liberal love for a whole bunch of words about nothing, proudly exclaiming that we're building back better. I think a more accurate slogan is building a better or worse bloated bureaucracy. Now I'm sure that slogan did not run as well with focus groups. But, Speaker, the Prime Minister warned Canadians that we might not be able to gather for Thanksgiving dinner in just a few weeks. However, he did serve up his own turkey dinner last night, offering a throne speech overflowing with every failed Liberal promise of the last 5 years and then some. Canadians love their turkey dinner, but you can only eat so much, Speaker. Leftovers get tiresome after a while and you need to throw them out. Like reheated turkey, 7 days later, Canadians are now asking themselves, maybe it's time to throw the Liberals out. The throne speech contained a dizzying number of major policy commitments underwritten by ongoing deficits and debt. Indeed, Speaker, the speech began with a proclamation that this is not the time for austerity. It seems to Liberals that anything short of massive federal spending and bureaucracy equals austerity. To quote the honourable member for Carleton, who just spoke on Twitter yesterday, the truest statement in that throne speech was this: we own an immense debt. Now, Speaker, recent polling suggests that more than half the country is quite concerned about the recent run-up of deficits and debt. Canadians are asking the government to balance support for emergency pandemic measures with fiscal responsibility, a task that this Liberal government is clearly not up for, opting rather to burden future generations with massive deficit-financed expansion of government. The throne speech outlined how the Liberals plan on paying for their grand ideas, or actually failed to outline that. And you've heard it before, many times. Just simply tax the rich. Now let's be clear to everyone, including the wealthy, they need to pay their fair share of taxes. The problem is, when you raise taxes substantially, people stop trying to earn that amount of money which is being overtaxed. The formula the Liberals like to use is that if we raise taxes at the top, we can then transfer it to the bottom. However, the Liberals did try that. They tried that already. You might remember the government increased the top tax rate on Canada's top 1%. It was just happened a few years ago. What happened, though, Speaker? Well, according to the Globe and Mail, high-income earners in 2016 paid $4.6 billion less in federal taxes, despite Liberal pledges that the new top tax bracket would raise around $3 billion in additional revenue. So that means a larger burden is taken from the middle to make up for what is lost. And there's no other way to do it other than what the Liberals were doing was deficit financing their promises. If you simply tax businesses more, jobs are shed. The costs, if they're able to survive, are then passed on to consumers, increasing the cost of living. Now, whether you're rich or otherwise, there's a certain point where you're not going to stick around and be bled to death. And not to mention that most predictions about taxing the rich by the left are rarely accounting for the large change in behavior. And they also, by that measure, end up overestimating the tax revenue. And despite the easy target they are, it isn't good when wealthy people leave your jurisdiction, your province, or your country. When you raise the tax rate to a level that is too high, it leads to significant legal and illegal tax avoidance strategies and lowers work effort, including labor force participation. Liberals know they can't balance the budget by increasing the top marginal tax rate, but they push those lines anyways. This is called the Tytler cycle, Lord Alexander Tytler. Now, it works, or I should say doesn't work, by promising a growing number of gifts of largesse from the Treasury but not actually saying how it will be paid. Now, if you think people are going to sit idly by and let the government take, you're absolutely unrealistic. And don't forget, whether you're wealthy, you're middle class or otherwise, if you're investing in anything, stocks, in real estate, whatever, it's done with after-tax dollars. So having said all of that, the left usually will say they have a plan for the economy. They always have a plan. They always seem to be planning. But what it really means is they want to have a bunch of bureaucrats and academics lay out a gaggle of endless government programs. In other words, central planning. But you know, if one plan fails, they'll make another plan. As Ronald Reagan famously said, the more the plans fail, the more the planners will plan. Now, conservatives believe that we need to cut taxes, ensure regulations are at a reasonable level, and give people the freedom to judge on their own, to provide for their families, to give to charity, to protect the most vulnerable, and give them basically the ability to do which is best in their particular situation, because a one-size-fits-all situation does not work. We need freedom. We need the ability for choice. And that's why socialism always fails, because there's no incentive. There's no incentive to improve your situation. Really, why do Canadians work extra hours? Why would a farmer get up at 5 a.m. to plow that field? Why does a trucker drive an extra kilometer? Why does a mechanic take an extra car in the shop at the end of the day? Why do people work a double shift? It's because people want things, and things cost money. But economic growth, Speaker, comes from people exchanging goods and services for dollars in terms of employment, or hours of the day in terms of dollars, in exchange for dollars. So if you're going to continually grow government, where does this money come from if wealthy people are bad, if growth is bad, if the free market is bad, if individuals choosing between necessity and the trivial is bad? What tree does that money come from? If everything comes from government, Speaker, in other words, if everything comes from government, who actually pays for government? Speaker, I'll point to childcare. It falls under my portfolio as the new Shadow Minister for Families, Children and Social Development. I want to first thank the Minister for his service to our country, and although we don't always agree on policy, I do look forward to working with him, making life more affordable for Canadian families and to ensure that those families get the support they need during these trying times. So let's talk about the childcare commitment, or their plan. Let's start with their plan. It was promised in 1993. This is ongoing, so if anyone actually believes they're finally going to get around to it, So, Speaker, so I'll do this quick. I know 2 minutes left. Okay, let's talk about childcare. So we want to ensure that families have more money in their pockets so that they're able to make choice. And we know that the one-size-fits-all, Ottawa knows best government institution isn't going to work for a number of people. Is it going to work for shift workers? Probably not. Is it going to work for people who need variables in their situation? Probably not, because you get what you're given, whether you like it or not, whether you want it or not, under this situation. Our plan is calling for freedom, the freedom for parents to make the choice that works best for them in their situation. Now, what the government is also doing is encroaching in provincial jurisdiction, because we all know childcare is in provincial jurisdiction. And what does that do when the federal government says to the provinces and territories, you are going to do this or else you do not get your money? It takes away competition. And we as Conservatives know that in many cases, whether it be internet, what have you, one of the best ways to fix a problem is competition. So if Ottawa is telling the provinces how to operate their childcare services, how do we actually fix the problem? The rich will go outside the system. Everyone else is to take what they get. Whereas if the Conservative plan, which encourages competition, which encourages money back in your pocket, more money back in your pocket, you can actually gauge through competition, say, well, what Manitoba is doing in childcare, that works really well. Maybe us in whatever province, New Brunswick, we have a few challenges. Maybe we can take that best practices and incorporate it into our own provincial situation, improving the lives of those who need childcare in our communities. More local control, more provincial control is what we're talking about in the childcare conversation, rather than Ottawa telling the provinces what to do. And as we all know, the Liberals have been promising that since 1993, so the fact that we expect them to get it done now, I find that very hard to believe. I see you're looking at me, so I will wind that down. Thank you, Speaker, for the time.
Questions and comments. The honourable member for Kingston and the Islands.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I want to congratulate my colleague on his new responsibilities as being a critic for family and family services. But I did want to just, ask him and touch on something. He talked about a promise that a previous Liberal government had made, and a promise had been made to deliver on a national child care program. A promise was set up. And it was signed by all 10 provinces. The plan was ready to go. As we heard earlier, we ended up in an election. The Liberals lost power at that time. It went to the Conservatives. And then 2 years later, the Conservatives completely canceled that plan. And they left the plan on the floor. And then they had another 8 years where they could have brought something else forward. I understand his criticism of the previous government not doing anything to bring forward, or for taking a while to bring forward a plan. But does he not bear some responsibility that the former Conservative government dropped the entire program, canceled it, and then brought nothing else forward in its place?
For Haliburton, Kawartha Lakes, Brock.
Thank you, Speaker, and thank you to my friend across the way. It's good to see him back in this place as well. A couple of things there. The deal that my friend was talking about took almost over 10 years to come up with in the first place, and we ran on a platform of giving more money back to people. You will understand that we gave $100 to each child to allow parents to have the choice in their lives, to better offset the cost of childcare or whatever situation they had. Maybe a parent wanted to stay home to raise their children, to teach their children. That's the essence of freedom. And to my friend who says they might make another deal, well, they've been in power for 5 years already, still haven't had that deal. And not to mention the fact that if we're talking about interprovincial deals, we still have many issues regarding interprovincial trade that still have not been worked out. It's easier in many cases to do business with another country than it is another province. So how we're going to work this out is going to take many years. The minister himself said on Power and Politics last night that it's going to take years to get this sorted out. People need help now, Speaker.
Questions and comments. The honourable member for Saanich Gulf Islands has been trying to get up several times here. I think we'll let her have a round at questions and comments.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And to my honourable colleague and friend from Haliburton, Kawartha Lakes, Brock, let me add my congratulations for your recent ascension within your party ranks. I will pick up on something the member from Carleton said, which you referenced his speech in yours. And he was using statistics from deficit to GDP ratio. It's certainly much more common to use statistics, as I'm sure you'll agree, of debt to GDP ratio, deficits being more temporary, and as the Parliamentary Budget Office has reported, when you look at World War II figures, the economy recovered quite quickly. Let's look at debt to GDP ratio. We went into this pandemic at about 30% debt to GDP ratio, much better than any other country in the G7. They predict we'll be by about 38% by the end of this. But in 1995, we had 66% debt to GDP ratio. So I don't want to scare Canadians into a kind of a sticker shock, thinking that our kids are going to pay for this. That's not true. And I think, Mr. Speaker, we need to actually look at the world. All the major economies in the world, all their central banks have been doing the same thing. So I'm going to stop there and ask my honourable colleague for a comment whether we can't reference history more precisely so as not to alarm people.
Member for Haliburton, Kawartha Lakes, Brock.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and nice to see my friend from Saanich Gulf Islands. I think a couple of things I would say to her is the current government has no plan to bring the books to balance. They have spending in perpetuity. It's going to go on forever, and this is what happened. When you continue to print money, as the Bank of Canada has done in many cases, and if you continue to rack up debt, you're going to debauch the currency or the economy, probably both at the same time. And when investors lose confidence and stop buying our debt, of course, inflation starts to rise, the Canadian dollar drops, the Bank of Canada is then forced probably to increase interest rates, and the access to credit shrinks. So that is why Conservatives talk about balancing the budget, reining in spending, controlling the cost of bureaucracy, and allowing services to be given to the people at a reasonable cost at the most effective measure. And the most effective measure is allowing people more choice in their lives with more money in their pockets, and not the funneling of their money to government, allowing it to go around the cotton candy machine, going to the province, to municipalities, and to the end user, which is the taxpayer.